Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You are listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about something that seems to be kind of one of those fields that you have to navigate this day and age. A lot of people are taking a look at Generation Y and they're saying to themselves, why don't they seem very motivated to be able to get up and just do what we used to do as boomers, that simple work ethic of being able to be self-motivated. On the program today, we're going to be talking about this very thing and what the differences are in the generations and how we can go about approaching this from not just a management standpoint, but also a leadership one. On the program today, I'd like to welcome both our guests, Megan Johnson and Larry Johnson, father and daughter, if you will. And we're going to be talking about their book, Generations, Inc., From Boomers to Linksters, Managing the Friction Between Generations at Work. And I'd like to welcome both Megan and Larry to the Beyond 50 radio program. How are you folks doing today?
Great. Oh, we're doing great. Thank you.
Now, this must be kind of neat that that you grew up with a father, that now you're sort of working together, if you will. I mean, you're out there and you've developed the Johnson Training Group. You work with people such as Harley Davidson, Nordstrom, American Express, Dairy Queen, and the like. How did this all come about for the both of you?
Well, my dad has always been a professional speaker since I was young, and he had child labor. He'd put his workbooks and stuff together, and I figured there had to be. I had to move up the food chain in his company, and so he was gracious enough to mentor me in becoming a professional speaker. But on my side, I feel that as long as I'm working with my dad, he is motivated to help me be successful. Because if not, I have to move back home.
Boy, there's a threat in the making, huh?
Exactly.
And on top of that, I have to be nice to her because she'll probably pick my nursing home.
There you go.
You keep thinking you're even going to get a nursing home, Dad. I got a big cardboard box.
Now, we have approached this subject a few different times, but I have to say that your book is pretty extensive when it comes to the experiences that each generation has and how it shapes our outlook, our attitudes, and as I mentioned earlier in the program, our work ethic, the way we approach and what work means to us. And it's different for everybody. And, and the argument that I've heard is this Generation Y seems to be feeling entitled, for instance, if they don't get up and, it's almost like somebody's placing a job in their lap when they feel like working. But I say, no, because I've seen a lot of kids out there that are pretty self-motivated, that really have it together. So what is this that we're really witnessing? What's the truth here?
Well,
you want me to answer that, Dan? Or you
well, I've got some opinions on it, too.
Okay.
My opinion is that to a great extent, this is true with our generation, the boomers, as well as any generation, that the nature of the work can really determine whether you're motivated or not. I had a lot of jobs when I was a kid where I wasn't very motivated, and I goofed off whenever I could. And I went to college. In college, I would get the best job was the job where you could hide and study. And it was only when I got into my background is in mental health, and I got into working with mental health patients and found that intriguing and exciting that all of a sudden I got motivated. And I started coming to work when I was 28 years old when I finally got to that point. I think I just did a little study looking at Google and their culture. And pretty much at Google, there's no problem with motivating young people. They're there to do what they consider to be really fascinating work. They're
right.
in an environment that really nurtures that, and so they're well paid for it. So they're really motivated. You don't have to worry about them goofing off. In fact, they pretty much manage their own time. The other thing I think is that affects young people is if they're in jobs that are not as challenging and exciting as being a software engineer at Google or something, we often think, well, then money will motivate them, the need to survive. I know when I was young, being poor helped with the motivational issue a lot. But if you're living with your parents and you really don't have any big disaster ahead of you, if you don't have a paycheck coming in, like not being able to pay your mortgage or support your kids, well, then you aren't as motivated, especially if the job's not fun. So you're right, there is a difference in the work ethic, but I think it comes from the work motivators. We were just, pushed to work because we had to. And then when we found something we liked, then we were motivated because we wanted to.
The other thing, too, that I think would be interesting to address, Larry, because you mentioned about, the Generation Y, and then you've got Generation X. I mean, here's a unique couple of generations that are self-motivated toward things they're drawn to. Now, what's interesting about that is you take a look at, for instance, the X Games. You got snowboarding, you got skateboarding, you got BMX bikes. Years ago, a parent would have said, you're wasting your time, why don't you find something more meaningful, sort of traditional. But,
right.
These kids are making a lot of money playing. They're really teaching us that money truly is an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely that their access to resources online have enabled them to work differently. And I think that's sometimes where you have sometimes people from the older generation, their perception that younger people aren't working. They are working, but they do work differently because of their access to information online. They're able to move very fluidly through work and personal life. So I can be doing something personal at work, for example, on Facebook, but that doesn't mean that I'm not getting my job done because on Wednesday night I'm working on a project.
Mm-hmm.
After my kids went to bed, I'm working on a project. And so I think sometimes, and this is a trait of baby boomers have very clear-cut, this is work time, and then after I go home, that's my personal time, and it can be a little bit more clear-cut. But with Generation Y, it's murky. It all kind of moves back and forth in and out of each other.
Mm-hmm. And you certainly can't start, talking to this generation or either of these generations with the same tone that old supervisors used to use. And it's funny because I even see guys in their 20s, gals in their 20s as well, trying to use that old school approach as though, do you realize I could just walk out that door right now and there ain't a damn thing you can do about it, so you better change your attitude.
And part of that comes from, and when my dad and I are speaking with live audiences, part of that comes from the communication style in the family has changed.
Right.
And in the past, many baby boomers, the communication style in the family was a pyramid where there was one decision maker at the top, and answers trickled down. But I like to joke, baby boomers, you brought teamwork into the family, and you've changed that structure into a circle. So a Generation Y person is not going to be receptive to that authoritarian dictator approach because most of their life experiences, and in the book we call them generational signposts, have really rewarded a team approach where we discuss things, and not only does my opinion matter, my opinion has weight, and we're going to consider different options. And so when you put them in an environment where you have somebody with, as you say, kind of that old school style, it completely goes against how a Generation Y person wants to thrive. And so in general, they'll look for an environment that definitely has a more community sense, where we're making decisions together. Maybe we won't make the decision that I want, but everybody's opinion has some sort of value.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, Megan, because there was a time a good few years ago that I was actually running a team of people. And what was fascinating is how I felt effective leadership was. I was born in 1964, so I'm at the tail end of the boomers.
You're a cusper.
Yeah, what's that?
You're a cusper. You're on the cusp.
Right. Well, and it's true. And as I was reading the profiles about, the experiences of each of these generations, I said, well, Generation X is a little bit like me because I was also a latchkey kid. I believed in going out and finding ways to earn money for things that I wanted. And once that happened, then I was done, that kind of a thing. But what was interesting is with this team, my attitude was I would ask people, what would you like to do today? Where would you like to work? And I would switch them around so they were always doing something different. Maybe the next time they showed up for a shift, they might be doing this. And it was amazing because I would have people go, how do you get these people so motivated to do what they, I've got to jump all over their, butts all the time. And I said, I think it's because I give them choices, and they get excited that there's going to be change and diversity. And I know that's how Generation X and Y really operate.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head by giving them those choices. And jaded people assume, well, if you just give them choices, it's like giving a child a choice to eat their dessert first.
Right.
They're gonna choose whatever is easy. I disagree. Motivated people, and Gen Xers and Gen Yers are motivated people, will choose tasks or projects that are challenging, that will increase their skill set. So they may not always be the most fun, but as long as they know, hey, you know, I'm doing this task here, but tomorrow there's going to be an opportunity to do something different. That's a real big payoff.
Agreed. How about, what's your opinion, Larry?
Yeah, I think so. We all appreciate having choices given to us. The difference between, say, me or you and somebody who's 21 years old or 22 years old is that maybe our families that wasn't sort of the de rigueur operational mode for our families. You know, we pretty much did what my mom and dad said, with
right.
no question. And the idea
when you
that
said
they would,
no, you didn't have to explain yourself.
That's right. And the idea that they would actually ask me or my sister what kind of car they ought to buy would have been, I'd have fainted. Yeah, you see, and we've talked to car dealers who have accommodated the fact that families come in now and the kids have as much say on what kind of car, you know, whether it has DVDs in the back or not makes a huge difference. The kids are actually having a say in what kind of car the family buys. And so I think kids in a way are, you can use the word entitlement, but also I think they feel like they should be empowered. Mm-hmm. Whether that's realistic or not, you know, you say, yeah, empowerment's a big popular word today in business, but you wouldn't want to empower somebody who has no experience to make a $100,000 decision. So if you feel like you're entitled to be empowered when you first come on the job and you don't have the experience to back it up, that's unrealistic. And so we have to back that Gen Wire up and say, hey, let's start you here. And you need to learn the ropes and get some experience. And that can be a conflict because us boomers look at those kids and say, well, they're just a bunch of spoiled brats. And that's not true. They've just been raised in a different way.
Well, totally agreed there. If you guys could, I would really like you to kind of just briefly outline each of the generations, because to me that was one of the most fascinating parts of the book, was just that, and it just started reminding me of things. I remember a lot of those experiences, you know, when you talk about going to the moon or the early 1970s, you know, the music, and there was just so much that was going on as I was growing up. But this day and age, it's the access, again, to information where there is no time, so we don't have that separation anymore that we did then, you know, where the event was out there, but now it's in your living room, for instance. But let's talk about the differences between, you know, of what each generation has experienced and how it's sort of modeled who they are.
Dad, do you want me to start that, or do you want to start?
Yeah, why don't you start?
Well, there's the traditional generation. These are people born before 1945, sometimes called the mature generation. Tom Brokaw coined the name the greatest generation. They're born before 1945. They are the smallest segment of the workforce. They're 8% of the workforce. Mm-hmm. A few of them still in traditional jobs, but also some of them coming back as volunteers. But the generational signposts that really shaped this generation were World War II and the Great Depression. And I make a point with the audience. I say, even if you have someone from this generation that was maybe too young to have fought in World War II or be a Rosie the Riveter, what those two generational signposts did was really reward postponing immediate gratification. And by postponing immediate gratification, this generation was able to raise their standard of living to heights we had never seen before. And something that I want to mention is every generation is marked by several points of what we call no turning back. And what that means is the way that we live our lives, the way we communicate, the way we do business changes so drastically that the way we operated previously becomes almost obsolete. And so for the traditional generation, that point of no turning back was really a new height of standard of living. Mm-hmm. And part of that new standard of living meant having kids. And so then the baby boom began, and that's people born between 1946 and 1964.
They are the best. They are the best generation of all of them.
The best. You guys are definitely the most Botox generation.
Oh, that's not true. I've never even touched Botox.
So here comes the baby boom generation, and really their generational signposts is they challenged equal rights. The job market began to open up for women. They really brought those issues into the cultural focus. And as the job market began to open up for women, the birth rate began to fall. And that's where we have Generation X, people born between 1965 and 1980. And they
actually, the pill helped us out a lot on that postponing of having children thing.
Yeah, it didn't seem to help you, Dad.
Yeah,
no,
once Studio 54 came about, that's when there was no turning back.
So you got this Generation X, the smallest generation, and their generational signposts are that they were the first generation to have both parents working in large numbers. And so the term latchkey kid became a popular term. And that experience, that generational signpost, rewarded independence, working on your own. Tell me what you want done, give me the tools to do it, and then leave me alone. And then baby boomers, realizing that, that they were getting older, they reached for the brass ring one more time in the 80s and started having a whole new slew of children, and that's Generation Y. And Generation Y has had a much more involved parent. And as we've talked, that communication style structure has changed, where I'm not going to respond to somebody being the one and only decision maker. Decisions are made in groups. We discuss things. We collaborate. And so you have this this sort of collaborative generation. And then in the book, we talk about the Wingster generation, and those are people born after 1995. They're teenagers. They're going to school, and they're the ones that are making your half-calf decaf latte at Starbucks every morning, selling you your movie tickets and bagging your groceries.
Mm-hmm.
So there you got them all.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Now let's talk about how I know we touched on it a little bit, so now we're bringing these generations together, and I noticed that on your website here, I was really, this was like an interesting statistic. It says, a Randstad survey reported that 51% of baby boomers had almost no interaction with Generation Y, and 71% of Generation Y had scarce contact with older employees. So there's an effort being made by the older ones, but the younger ones are saying, we really don't want to make an effort whatsoever. Is that, what's going on there?
Oh, I think that's part of just that, part of being young is that you feel that people should make the effort to communicate with you. But it's really important to have those interactions because it's the connections that are really important to Generation Y. It's not so much the company I'm working for, it's the people I connect with. And they want to know that there's somebody there that they can connect with. Not just connect with as in have a drink after work, but connect with and that somebody that is interested in my success at the organization, somebody that I can ask those silly questions, somebody that's sort of on my side. And it's vital to have those connections with Generation Y. But sometimes it is sort of on the plate of the more seasoned employee to reach out and make those connections.
There's also I think for baby boomers and older, we were raised in a culture where you came home from school, and I know this is true for me. My mother wasn't there because she was working, but my grandmother was there, and there was and I saw my older relatives on a regular basis. I was with my grandmother every evening, and so I think I had a lot more connection with older people than young people do today, where, Grandma now, if she's alive, lives in Florida, and we go visit her once a year at her condo, and meanwhile, the kids come home, and they're either dealing with a mom who's sort of a helicopter mom, but there's not a lot of other family connection because our families have been spread out and sort of replaced with Xboxes and video games and sort of media, so that media to a great extent has replaced the relationships that we had with older people in times past.
I know I was astounded when I would see, for instance, you talk about Xbox and all that, that some of these people will sit in front of the TV and play these games for hours now. Back in my day, I remember Video Pong was the first one that came out, and you were just excited when you could actually get a unit that you could have in your own house so you didn't have to spend a quarter to play Video Pong. Then there was Atari, and then Nintendo. And what was amazing is how quickly that technology accelerated to where you were playing video games, for instance. And even though we got an Atari system, and I might spend an hour or two playing it, I couldn't sit and spend all day long playing video games, but these kids do. But I think also what they're trying to do, to me, and this certainly, shout out your opinion on this one, is that they're learning, understanding, and getting to speak the language of the technology because that may be a direction they want to move in.
Definitely a direction they want to move in, but also, and my dad has a great way of explaining this, is technology is their native language.
Right.
At 41, I can learn a foreign language. I could, go to classes or listen to CDs and learn a foreign language, but it will never be my native language. I will always have to think about it to speak it. But this generation, technology, they've grown up with technology. It's their native language, so they don't even have to think about it when it comes to really using it in their day-to-day lives.
The other thing I wanted to point out, too, is the alarming rate at which children, especially of this generation, seem not to be finishing high school. And the biggest argument there, and I agree with this, that I just don't think those kids can think that slow. They're just getting, I was bored with high school myself. I mean, I skipped as many days as I could get away with before being kicked out, but once I was able to go, say 3 or 4 classes a day, I enjoyed going, and I would learn, and I got good grades in classes I was challenged in. But I think the modality of high school, needs to really change. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think you have a good point.
I agree, but I've never been a high school fan. I hated school, so
Yet we stuff it down their throats and tell them, without a high school education, it's like, look, don't give me that nonsense. There are people out there with PhDs that are trying to find jobs at Starbucks. So don't tell these kids that high school really matters, But anyway.
Right. Well, I'm a big advocate of education. I think everybody short changes themselves when they don't pursue an education. And so I'm not going to say that they shouldn't finish high school, but I do think the educational system is set up to really effectively teach only a fraction of our students. Now, what exactly has to happen to make it a more effective system, I'm not an expert. I don't know.
Right.
But it's just, I do think you've made a point. It's a system that was created back when the baby boomers flooded the educational system. But when baby boomers started heading to school in large numbers, we created a system to teach them, and it's the same system we're using today. We change our behavior in all areas of our life to get a better end result, but it seems like in the educational field, we're often slow to make changes. And so now I'm not an educational expert, and I know there's restraints and restrictions and budget constraints, but the educational system has not changed. I don't think it's kept up with the changing generations.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's that, and so take a look at how this generation that's coming into the workforce slowly and by increasing numbers, that you might take a look and go, well, what is this? You were cutting classes or you just didn't finish high school in general. But this would be somebody who's found a way to become self-educated to be able to maybe be an asset to the company. So it's a matter of how do you navigate that particular field?
How you navigate the particular field of that they've learned other skills to be an asset to the company rather than a traditional education? Well,
there's that. No, the idea is that they might look, again, back to the baby boomers and the work ethic. You seem to just don't think that for instance, it shows to me that, that high school or showing up or being on time was something that you were attuned to. So what makes me believe that you're going to change those habits if I offer you a job, for instance?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so you've already proven that you're not a timely person, or that you're not just tenacious in high school. Why would I hire you? Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like it's sort of like I've had bad credit. You should sell me a car because now I'm going to make payments.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can blame it all on Dr. Spock.
Cuddle the kids and tell them how special they are.
That's right. And if you don't want to go to school, you don't have to, sweetheart.
Now, tell me, as you have been out there on your speaking tour, you must get some really fascinating, interesting insights and questions from people. What have been some that really have surfaced pretty consistently for you?
Well, I know one that we've gotten several times is managers, because we teach a lot of leadership and management kinds of stuff in our seminars. Managers come up and say, "What do I do when I get a call from Gen Y's parents because I've because I've disciplined somebody or laid them off, or or they'll have parents show up at the interview."
Oh no!
Yeah. So we get that one pretty often. What do you think of anything, Megan?
What I think is interesting is I throw this statistic out with audiences. I'll say, the average. I said, Generation Y is staying at home. They're living at home longer. There's no longer the stigma of living at home. A lot of baby boomers. I like to joke with baby boomers. Baby boomers say, by the time I was 18, I'd been living on my own for 10 years.
Right.
Like, yeah, you moved out when you're 9, but Generation Y is staying home longer. Some of it is for financial reasons because of the job market, but also part of it is because there's not that stigma anymore. And I make a point to audiences. I say, average age is between 24 and 26 years old. That Generation Y stays at home. Well, you can always hear the gasp from the few parents that that they're like, where they realize that their child who is still at home, and their friends will start poking them and laughing at them that, yes, there's your child. It's going to be home till 24 or 26. It's always fun to see those. There's a couple, and they always seem to be the moms. The moms are like, and their faces are stricken, and they realize, yes,
they're guilty of it.
It's going to be home.
Well, the values have changed pretty dramatically, so that I know for us as boomers, most of us left home because our parents were driving us nuts, or we got kicked out, or we wanted to have a sexual relationship, and you couldn't do that at home. So so you leave home so you can get married or have a girlfriend and live with them or whatever. And now we see more and more. Here's a 24-year-old, and he has his girlfriend over to his parents' house and spending the night. We have several baby boomer friends who have that kind of situation.
Wow.
Well, when you've got all that and you have sex, and your meals are paid for and your laundry's done, why would you leave home?
Right. Like Rodney Dangerfield in the movie Back to School. My only advice to you is stay home. It's a rough world out there. Let your parents worry about it.
That's right.
And it's funny, too, that you mentioned earlier, Megan, about that stigma of staying home. And this is true. You can use this when you're out on your public speaking. That stigma, believe me, has haunted me in dreams. Where, all of a sudden, I realize I'm still living at home and I'm 38 years old. God, where did I go wrong? And I really literally have those dreams, and I wake up and go, okay, I am living on my own. I thought so.
Yeah.
But, these kids, in some cases, as you're talking about, wouldn't even think twice about it.
Yeah.
No.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, but my dad made a good point where they move out because your parents are driving you crazy. Well, I think this new parent-child relationship, they're not driving them crazy. There's a Gallup poll I read about a year ago. 90% of Generation Y report being very close to their parents. Now, you compare that to 1974, 40% of baby boomers said they'd be better off without their parents. Mm-hmm. So it's a totally different attitude about the parent-child relationship.
Yeah, totally. For those of you tuning in, we're talking with Megan and Larry Johnson, father and daughter team, going on speaking tours, teaching people and letting them learn what it's like to be able to mesh the generations together by understanding what their motivations are in their book, Generations, Inc. Is there a website that you can give us that our listeners can go to find out more about this?
Yep. It is genincbook.com. So that's GENINCBOOK, genincbook.com.
Any final thoughts the two of you would like to leave with our listeners?
Dad?
Well,
oh, sure. Leave it up to Dad.
Yeah, leave it up to Dad here. I think that the most important thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with people from different generations is that there is a reason that they are different, having to do with the change, how fast our culture has changed. Mm-hmm. The old, our grandparents and their parents, there wasn't that big difference because things didn't change that much from one generation to another. But the generations, just our culture is so much different, and the technology is so much different. So we, each generation in the last 3 or 4 generations has gotten raised quite differently, and therefore, when that Gen Y is driving you nuts, you got to realize it isn't all his fault or her fault.
Oh, it goes both ways. When that baby boomer is driving you nuts,
right?
I can't imagine that being the case.
Yes, but I like to say to audiences, because audiences say, well, why should I? Why should I do anything different? I say, one time we didn't wear seatbelts in cars, but we got new information and we changed our behavior, so we have a better end result. And that's really what my dad and I are talking about in the book, Generation Inc., and when we're standing in front of audiences, is that you're changing your behavior to get a better end result.
Exactly. Learn to be adaptable, because that's the best way.
It is.
That's for sure. The book is Generations Inc. Our guests, Megan Johnson and Larry Johnson. Thank you for both for being on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Hey,
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We also want to encourage you, the listeners out there, to visit us at our website, which is beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. I'm Daniel Davis. Again, thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.